Imagine a palace where the sound of a child's laughter isn't a comfort, it's a threat. A home with sprawling courtyards and gilded halls, where the echo of joyful play could be a death warrant. Picture a world where seeing your own brother, the boy you played with, triggers a cold sweat of terror. This wasn't some fever dream. In the heart of the mighty Ottoman Empire, this fear was real. For a new sultan to claim the throne, a chilling and brutal tradition had to be honored. His brothers had to die. This wasn't random violence or a fit of rage. This was the law. A calculated, cold, and systematic practice known as the law of fratricide, designed to stop a wound that had nearly destroyed the empire once before. This is the story of how a royal palace was turned into a hunting ground, and how the act of brother killing brother was seen as the only path to survival. The disease of succession. So how does a tradition this horrifying even begin? Why would one of the most powerful empires in history resort to something so monstrous? To understand the cure, you first have to understand the disease. And that disease was chaos. Unlike European monarchies, where the eldest son usually got the crown, the Ottoman tradition was dangerously vague. An old Turkic belief held that every single male in the ruling family, every son, brother, and nephew of the sultan, had a legitimate claim to the throne. Power wasn't simply inherited. It had to be seized. When a sultan died, it was a mad dash for power. His sons would scatter from the palace, racing to the capital or a major city to be declared the new ruler. The first one to have his name read in the Friday prayers and mint coins in his name became the sultan. The losers? They didn't just lose the throne. They almost always lost their lives. A living brother, even one hiding in a faraway province, was a magnet for rebellion. Ambitious governors or rival powers could easily rally behind a spare prince, plunging the entire empire into a bloody civil war. This wasn't just a theory. It had happened, and it had almost shattered the Ottoman state. The ultimate nightmare, the trauma that haunted the dynasty for centuries, was the Ottoman interregnum. It started in 1402. The formidable Sultan Bayezid, known as the Thunderbolt, was defeated and captured by the conqueror Timur, or Tamerlane. With the Sultan in chains, the empire was left without a leader. Bayezid's sons Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, and Musa were not about to share power. What came next was more than a decade of relentless, bloody civil war. Brother fought brother. Armies clashed. The empire their ancestors had built was torn apart. For 11 years, Ottoman lands were a chessboard for their deadly game. Alliances were made with foreign enemies, just to get an edge on a sibling. Cities were burned, fields were destroyed, and a generation of Ottomans was spent killing other Ottomans. Isa was eventually hunted down and killed in a bathhouse by his brother Mehmed's agents. Suleiman was betrayed and killed while fleeing his brother Musa. Finally, in 1413, the last two brothers, Mehmed and Musa, faced off. Musa was defeated and strangled, the preferred method for a royal execution. Mehmed I finally put the empire back together, but a terrible lesson was burned into the Ottoman mind. A war between brothers was a poison that could kill the entire state. The interregnum was terrifying proof of what happens when succession is left to chance. It was a problem that demanded a solution, no matter how terrible. The conqueror's cruel cure. Decades later, a new sultan would take the throne. He was a man of immense ambition, intellect, and chilling ruthlessness. A man who wouldn't just expand the empire, but would dare to write this brutal solution into law. His name was Mehmed II. History remembers him as Mehmed the Conqueror. After he famously conquered Constantinople in 1453 and remade it as Istanbul, Mehmed II set about rebuilding the state. He was a visionary, a builder, a patron of the arts. But at his core, he was a pragmatist made of steel. He had studied the history of his ancestors, especially the near-fatal civil war his own grandfather had survived. He knew the greatest threat to his empire wasn't a foreign army, but a war within his own family. He believed the stability of the state, the order of the world, was the only thing that mattered. To secure that order, he created a legal code called the Canu Name, and buried inside it was a clause so cold it has defined his legacy as much as his conquest. He declared, "Of any of my sons that ascends the throne, it is acceptable for him to kill his brothers for the common benefit of the people." The majority of the ulema have approved this. Let action be taken accordingly. And there it was, state-sanctioned fratricide. It was no longer a grim, unspoken necessity. It was now the official policy of the dynasty. The logic was as cold as it was brutal. The death of a few princes, even innocent ones, was a lesser evil than a civil war that could kill tens of thousands. It was a political calculation of staggering cruelty, sold as a sacrifice for the greater good. The method of execution was just as calculated. Royal blood was sacred and couldn't be spilled. So princes weren't killed by the sword. The chosen method was strangulation, usually with a silken bowstring. This quiet, bloodless death preserved the sanctity of the royal body while extinguishing a royal life. The task was often carried out by special executioners, many of whom were deaf mutes, ensuring their total loyalty, and more importantly, their absolute silence about the horrors they witnessed in the dark corners of the palace. Mehmed the Conqueror had turned a brutal practice into a principle of the state. He had created a system where, upon a sultan's death, the race to the throne wasn't just for power, but for survival. For the winner, the crown. For everyone else, the silk cord. The law was now written. A terrible new reality had been cemented at the heart of the empire. But a law is only as powerful as the will to enforce it. Before we witnessed the terrifying peak of this practice, a night of horror that would become the darkest day in the palace's history, take a moment to subscribe. We explore the most compelling and often disturbing chapters of the past. So if you want to uncover more hidden truths, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next. A palace of ghosts, with the law of fratricide now enshrined, the Topkapi Palace was transformed. On the surface, it was the magnificent heart of a global empire, a place of stunning beauty and unimaginable wealth. But beneath that gilded surface, it became a pressure cooker of paranoia and fear. Every prince who grew up within its walls knew that his own brothers were his rivals, and one day, his potential executioners. The law wasn't always used. Some successions were smoother than others. But the threat was always there, a phantom haunting the royal nursery. The case of Sem Sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror's own son, shows exactly why the law was made. When Mehmed died, his older son, Bayezid II, took the throne. Sem challenged him, lost, and fled, becoming a political pawn for European powers for years, a constant threat of a foreign-backed invasion. To the Ottoman court, Sem's story was proof that a living brother was a weapon that could be aimed at the empire's heart. For over a century, the silk cord did its work. But the practice would reach its horrifying peak in the year 1595, a moment of such raw brutality that it shocked even the standards of the time. That year, Sultan Murad III died. His son, Mehmed III, ascended to the throne. Mehmed had spent years as a provincial governor, living in fear of his own father. Now, the power was his. But he had 19 younger brothers and half-brothers living in the palace. Some were grown men. Many were just children. The youngest was only 11 years old. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares. On January 28th, 1595, Mehmed III summoned all 19 of his brothers. He reportedly told them they had nothing to fear, that they were being called for a circumcision ceremony. One by one, the princes were led from a main hall into an adjoining room. Inside, the deaf-mute executioners were waiting with their silk cords. One by one, they were strangled. The silence of the executioners meant no pleas for mercy were heard, and no secrets would ever be told. Imagine the scene, the confusion of the younger boys, the dawning horror, the muffled sounds from the next room, the chilling, systematic extermination of a generation. 19 sons of the same dynasty, snuffed out in a single night of terror. The next day, their small bodies were carried out in cypress coffins and buried next to their father. A grim silence fell over the city of Istanbul, but Mehmed III's purge wasn't over. To ensure no new rivals could emerge, he ordered that 7 of his late father's pregnant concubines be dealt with. They were sewn into sacks and drowned in the Sea of Marmara. And in a final chilling act, some sources claim he even had the executioners themselves put to death. This massacre was a profound trauma. It was the horrifying, logical end of Mehmed the Conqueror's law. The government was stable, yes. Mehmed III's rule was secure. But the price was a palace filled with ghosts and a sultan haunted by what he'd done. The act was so extreme, so far beyond the pale, that it planted the seeds for the end of fratricide itself. The empire had stared into the abyss, and some began to feel that the cure had become far worse than the disease. The gilded cage. The slaughter of the 19 princes was a turning point. It had secured the throne, but the sheer cruelty left a deep stain on the dynasty. When Mehmed III died in 1603, his successor was his 13-year-old son. Ahmed had grown up in the shadow of his father's monstrous act. He had only one living brother, Mustafa, who was known to be mentally unwell. Faced with the choice, and perhaps sickened by his father's massacre, Ahmed I broke with tradition. He couldn't bring himself to order the execution of his only brother. Instead of the silk cord, he created a new solution. On the surface, it seemed more humane. In reality, it was just a different kind of cruelty. This was the birth of the kafes, literally, the cage. The kafes was not a dungeon. It was a set of luxurious apartments within the Topkapi Palace, beautifully decorated and opulent. But it was a prison, a gilded cage. From the moment a prince was confined, his life was over. He was placed under permanent house arrest, guarded day and night. Life inside the kafes was one of profound, suffocating isolation. The princes had servants and barren concubines, but they were forbidden from marrying or having children. They received an education, but were denied any training in leadership, warfare, or politics. Their world shrank to a few lavish rooms and a small, walled garden. They were ghosts, cut off from the world, living under the constant terror that the reigning sultan could order their execution at any moment. Years, sometimes decades, would pass in this suspended animation. Some princes went mad from the loneliness and paranoia. Others gave themselves over to debauchery or sank into a lifelong depression. They were living, but not truly alive. While the kafes ended systematic fratricide, it created a new, disastrous problem. It started producing sultans who were completely unfit to rule. Before, princes governed provinces and gained experience. Now, a new ruler would be dragged out of the kafes after 30 or 40 years of total seclusion, psychologically damaged, politically clueless, and utterly incapable of leading a vast empire. Sultan Ibrahim I, for example, spent 22 years in the kafes. He proved to be so erratic and incompetent, he became known as Ibrahim the Mad, and was eventually deposed and executed. The system had swapped the short-term chaos of civil war for the long-term decay of incompetent leadership. The cage saved the brothers' lives, but it may have condemned the empire to a slow, lingering death. The story of Ottoman succession is a brutal journey. The terror of civil war bred a solution of shocking cruelty, the law of fratricide. The horror of that law, seen in the massacre of 19 brothers, led to a seemingly kinder alternative, the gilded cage of the kafes. But that cage, in turn, created generations of broken, inexperienced rulers who arguably sped up the empire's decline. Each solution created a new, unforeseen problem. It raises a difficult question, one that still haunts the halls of history. Was it a necessary evil? Did the cold logic of Mem the Conqueror sacrificing a few for the stability of millions actually work? Or was the price of that stability, paid in blood and sanity, far too high? In the silent marble corridors of the Topkapi Palace, the walls hold the answer. They remember a time when power was absolute, when the state was everything, and when the laughter of a brother was the most dangerous sound in the world. If you found this look into the dark side of history compelling, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. We have more stories about the brutal realities and complex choices that shaped our world. Check out our other video on the screen now, and let us know in the comments. If you were an Ottoman prince, would you have trusted your brother? Or would you have raced for the throne, knowing it was his life or yours? Thanks for watching.